Ladies and gentlemen, we're on a roll today. I think I have almost your whole week of videos done. You are going to need your grapher, so hopefully you are purchasing one of those little things soon. But here's what we're going to do today. Our objectives. All right, we are going to write a couple of more equations, because practice makes perfect. And then we're going to review regression analysis, and I'll explain what that is when we get closer. I did actually give you a handout at the beginning of the year on the steps involved with that, so hopefully you still have that. If not, I'm going to re-give you the steps, and then we will go through it step by step on a grapher. So it will be very, very helpful if you have your grapher. Alright, so let's start our first example, and I want to write the equation. I'm going to tell you that it's a quadratic, which is nice. I'm going to write the quad equation in standard form. So remember, we talked about yesterday, you have to be very careful in what format they want you to write your answers in. So this one wants your answer in standard form. You're going to be given a lovely little graph. It's going to look kind of like this. This x-intercept is going to be a -3. This one is 2. And then I'm going to have a point. It's not the vertex, it's just a point. It's going to be 1, -2. So since I have my x-intercepts, I'm actually going to start the process using my intercept form or factored form. So I'm going to write y is equal to a. I have 1 at a -3. Remember that the signs are always the opposite when it's inside the function, and x minus 2. I'm going to use my point to help me find a. So I'm going to substitute in a -2 is equal to a. Here's my x, and here's my x. So then if I simplify that math, it's going to be a. 3 plus 1 is 4. 1 minus 2 is a -1. So now I have a -2 is equal to a -4a. Divide both sides by a -4. And then I get a is equal to 2 over 4, which is a half. So now I know my a. So I'm going to substitute that back into my equation, and I have x plus 3 and x minus 2, but it asked me to write the equation in standard form, which means I need to expand my equation. So I'm going to start with my box first. Okay, and this is x plus 3, x minus 2. So I end up with an x squared, a -2x, a 3x, and a -6. Combine like terms and I get x squared plus 1x minus 6. Now I need to distribute the 1/2. So I'm going to rewrite my equation to make sure that I don't miss anything. So x squared plus 1x minus 6. And I'm going to distribute that half to every term on the inside. So when I do that, I get y is equal to 1/2 x squared plus 1/2 x minus 6 over 2, and that turns into a -3. So my answer, my official answer, is 1/2 x squared plus 1/2 x minus 3. Remembering again that if I'm writing a function or an equation, I have to have either f of x is equal to or y is equal to. Alright, so let's do another example. Same basic directions. Okay, so I want you to, here's my example. I want to write the equation. It is going to be a quadratic, which is kind of the whole chapter that we've been in. Write the equation in standard form. So remember, I have to go all the way to the end to finish. In this one, you're going to be given that the vertex is 210, and I know that it passes through, and then I'm going to have the point 42. So there's the information about my graph. Since they gave it to me in vertex form and then it passes through a point, I'm actually going to start writing my equation in vertex form. So I know y is equal to a times x minus h quantity squared plus k. Substitute in what I know, and I know that my vertex is x minus 2 quantity squared plus 10. Okay, and then I'm going to substitute in my 4 and my 2. So I'm going to have 2 is equal to, there's my a, my x is 4, quantity squared, plus 10. I'm going to subtract 10 from both sides, so a negative 10 and a negative 10, and I get 4 minus 2 is 2 squared times a is equal to 2 minus 10 is a negative 8. 4a is a negative 8. Divide both sides of the equation by 4, and then you get a is equal to a negative 2. So I'm going to come back up here in my little space, and I'm going to write my negative 2, and then I'm going to put in the other information that I know. There's my x minus 2 squared and the 10. Alright? If you'll remember the shortcut for my x minus 2 quantity squared, and I'll talk you through it, I'm going to square the first term, x squared, multiply these two together, and double it. So a negative 2x times 2 is a negative 4x. Square the last term. A negative 2 squared is a positive 4. And then there's my 10. And I'll just write that right here. It's a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. And I actually have a minus in here because my middle term is negative. Alright, so that's what I did. I squared the first term, multiplied the insides together and doubled it, and then squared the last term. Now I need to distribute that negative 2, and I get a negative 2x squared plus 8x minus 8 plus 10. And again, I need to combine like terms, and I have a negative 2x squared plus 8x plus 2, and that one's done. So it's actually, I think, becoming much simpler being able to write the quadratics using our given information. Alright, I'm going to give you some data, and then I'll start a new page when we start our next problem. So now what we want to do is write a model, which basically means write an equation, if I'm given a data set. Okay. In this particular model, I'm going to be told that it's a quadratic, which is helpful because that tells me what type of equation I need to write. This process is called, regression analysis. So it's a big word to mean that I'm going to put a set of data into my calculator, and then I'm going to find an appropriate equation to model the data. You must have a grapher to be able to do this. I'm going to write the steps a little bit at a time, and then we will move through our problem. Alright? So one additional piece of information, I can do regression analysis on many different types of data. And I'll show you on your calculator, I could do linear, I could do quadratic, I could do cubic, I could do quartic, etc., etc., etc. Name that movie. So my linear, quadratic, cubic, quartic, and then I think there are several other options that you can choose. But today, we're just going to go back through the process and use our quadratic model. Alright, so let me give you our data first. We are actually going to have, I think it would be great fun to watch, a pumpkin launching catapult. I think that just sounds like way too much fun. All right, and I want to find the best fitting quadratic model. All right, so that's my task. So then I need to be given a set of data. So I'm going to have my angle of the launch. Okay, and that can change, and if that changes what happens to my pumpkin. And then I'm going to have the distance that the pumpkin travels. Okay, and that distance is going to be in feet. All right, this is going to be my x variable, which is the independent variable, and this is going to be my dependent variable, y. So my first data point is going to be 20 and 372. My next one is going to be 30, 462. Then I'm going to have 40, 509. Then 50, 501. 60, 437. And then 70 and 323. So those are my data points. So what I'd like to do is kind of walk us through step by step in your grapher. See if we can see the grapher. Maybe it's best if I put it there and I'll write on the other side. All right, so I'm going to write the steps that we need to do, and then I'm going to show them to you. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to clear all of the information that we already have in. So I'm going to write clear all lists, and I do that by doing second memory and then option number 4. Okay, I'm going to turn my grapher on, clear what I have. So then I'm going to go, I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to show you everything. Let's see if I can scoot it up just a little bit. I need to be able to see my data too. Alright, so I'm going to go second memory, and the memory is above the plus sign. Okay, see if I can get it to focus a little bit. Maybe that's better. Okay, and then what I'm going to do, if you'll notice, option number 4 says clear all lists. So I'm going to do 4 and then hit enter, and it tells me that my lists are cleared. The second thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my stat plots on, because a stat plot is what we are actually going to do, and it's helpful if you can see the data. So I'm going to go second stat plot. Notice that my plots are turned off, so I'm going to go hit enter. I'm going to go to my on and hit enter, and then hit enter just to make sure. Okay, so now I think they're turned on. And if you go back and look at that screen, notice that my first graph is here. This is a scatter plot. This is a different graph. This is a like a histogram or a bar chart. Box and whisker plots, these are actually kind of fun. Notice that it's telling me that my x's are living in L1, which is list 1, and my y data is going to live in L2. So that's what I'm going to do next. So the third step is that I'm going to put my data into my list. Okay, so I'm going to go stat and then edit, and notice that now I have my L1, my L2, my L3. If your calculator shows something different, I can help you adjust that, but for right now we're just going to assume yours looks like mine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in all of my x's. So I have 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and 70. Okay, and I think you can see those. All right. You always want to make sure that your data is entered correctly, because that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make when we're doing regression analysis in our calculators. All right, so now I'm going to put in my y's, being a little bit more careful because I have more buttons to push. 462, 509, 501, 437, and 323. It's really important to notice that my x's and y's, I have the same number in each one. If you don't, it will generate an error. Okay, so now that my data is in, the next step that I need to do is I want to look at my data. So step number 4 is look at the data. So I already have my scatter plots turned on. We did that in the second step. So now what I'm going to do is do a zoom 9, which is zoom statistics. So I'm going to do a zoom 9. Oh, I need to take the other y equals off. Sorry, my bad. Once its dots are done, I'm going to go here and I'm going to clear and clear, and I'm going to go back there and put it in its normal mode to make sure that I'm getting what I need. Okay, so now my graphs are back to normal, so now I do my zoom 9. And that looks an awful lot like a parabola, okay? If I wanted to, I could do a zoom 3 enter and zoom out a little bit, but I think for the time being we'll go back to our zoom 9. Alright, so now the next step is, now that I know that my data really does look like a parabola, I want to find that equation. So I'm going to write get equation. And I'll give you the specific steps. I'm going to do stat, then I'm going to do calculate, and then I'm going to pick option number 5 for quadratic regression. Okay? And then I need to tell it where my data lives. Alright, so let's go to our stat button, which is here. Stat, calculate, option number 5 for quad reg. Now what it's waiting for is for you to tell it where the data lives. And I'm going to write this right here. It's L1, L2. That's the default for your calculator. So if you just hit enter at this point, then it will enter that data into your it will enter that data when it does its calculation. But let's pretend that you put it someplace else, so you need to tell it where it lives. So I would do second L1, it's up above the 1, and then I would do comma, which is up above the 7, and then I would tell it second L2, which is up above the number 2, and I would hit enter. So step number 6 is going to be write down that equation, because now is when it's easiest to read. So I'm going to keep scooting things up a little bit. Notice that it tells me here's the generic form for my formula, ax squared plus bx plus c. So I'm going to write down my a, my b, and my c into this equation, rounding each to 3 decimal places. So now that equation is y is equal to a negative 0.261 x squared plus 22.591x, and then plus 23. I ran out of room, 029. Always rounding to the 3rd decimal place. Alright? So we're getting closer to being done. See if I can get that in the way so you can see it. Alright, so now that I have my equation, okay, now what I want to do is put this into my y equals so I can use it. Alright, so now I'm going to go to my y equals, and then I'm going to push these buttons. So I'll write it down and then we'll go back and do it. I'm going to push VARS for variables, and then I'm going to do 5, and then equation, and then regression equation, and then enter. Alright, so those are the steps that we're going to take. See if I can get this where you can see it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my variables. Sorry, the glare is pretty wicked. Go to my variables, 5 for statistics, equation, regression equation, and notice it brought your equation in, and then I hit graph. And then it will draw my line through my data points. And look, it's pretty doggone good. Alrighty, so that takes care of my data. I know the equation, and then what we want to do is use that to predict. So for this particular problem, I'm going to predict how far the pumpkin will travel when I launch it at 43 degrees. Okay, the 43 degrees is my x. All right, so I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. So I'm going to do a zoom 3, enter. There's my parabola. So nice. Then I'm going to do second, calculate, number 1 for value. I'm going to tell it that I want the x to be 43, and I'm going to hit enter. And notice that it tells me that the pumpkin would travel 511.079 feet. So that little sucker is going to travel for a long way. All right, so that is the process to do regression analysis. All right, so we are going to do one more example, different set of data. So let me get a new sheet because it seems to take up a lot of room. Okay, then I'll have my handy dandy calculator out. I'm going to clear that information. I'm going to clear my y equals. All right, so I'm going to get it all set back to 0. And here's going to be our next example. So I'll just leave my calculator kind of chilling right there. All right, our example is going to involve the data hours per person spent on the internet per year. All right, so that's what the data that we're going to look at, and then we're going to do our regression analysis. All right, so let me give you our little set of data. Okay, I think maybe my grapher's in the way. I'll scoot it over for a bit. This is going to be the year. Time is always going to be your independent variable, almost always. My y is going to be hours per person. Okay. It's always important to know what your units are. And then I'm going to give you my data points. So I'm going to have 1997. And in 1997, they would spend 34 hours per person per year. I think it's probably significantly different now. My second data point is 54. Third, the year 1999, and that's going to be an 82. Then I'm going to have the year 2000. I'm a little bit disappointed in the year 2000. I thought we'd be flying spaceships by then. Then I have the year 2001, and I have 134. All right, so we're going to do the same basic process. I'll write the steps down. Let me see if I can get my grapher so you can actually see it. Maybe that's better. All right. So I'm going to go back to my main screen. So let's go ahead and walk through the process again. So I'm just going to write the steps down, and you need to make sure that you write these steps down because you are going to need to learn this process. So number 1, I'm going to clear my lists. Okay, and I do that by second memory, and then it's 4 to clear lists. So second memory, then I'm going to 4 to clear my lists, and I hit enter. So now my data has been wiped clean. Technically, your second step is to turn your stat plots on. But ours are already on because it won't go off until you turn it off. So at this point, I'm not going to redo that step. And if I just show you to re-verify, see it's still on, so I don't need to do anything on that one. All right, so for number 3, I'm going to enter my data. All right, so I'm going to do stat, and then edit, and then I can enter my data. All right, I always do my x's first, so I'm going to enter 1997, forgot the 1, 1998, 1999, 2000, and 2001. Then I'm going to enter my y's, 34, 54, 82, 106, and 134. And then I'm going to check to make sure I entered my data correctly, because if your data is wrong, everything's going to be wrong. All right, now I want to look at my data, and I want to look at it to see what shape it is. So I'm going to do a zoom 9. And that looks a little bit odd to me. So I'm actually going to do a zoom 3 enter to zoom out a little bit. And it might be quadratic, but there's really not a lot of data points. So it's a little bit iffy. But we're going to assume, since it told us to write a quadratic model, that that's what we're going to do. So let me scoot this up a little bit. All right. Ooh, bad glare. Okay, so now the next step is to get our equation. And to do that, I'm going to do a stat, calculate, and I'm going to choose 5, which is the quadratic regression. And then I have to tell it where my data lives. Okay, and remember that L1 and L2 is the default. So I'm going to do stat, calculate, option 5 for quad reg. Sorry, the glare is bad. And this time I'm just going to hit enter because the default is going to always be L1 and L2. Step number 6 is to write down your equation. So we have our equation in front of us, so now I'm going to write it down. I'm sorry, the glare is really bad. Can I fix it? Maybe. So if we write down our equation, it's going to be y is equal to 0.8, that's an 857 x squared minus 3401.657 x, and then plus, wow, that's a big number, 3374849.2. Alrighty. So that's going to be my model. Alright, the numbers are big. That doesn't mean that we made a mistake, but we're going to have some big numbers. And hopefully, I'm just going to go back and check my data to make sure that I had good numbers, 54, 82, 106, and 134. Everything seems to be good. Alright, so step number 7 is to bring that equation into your y equals so we can see it. Alright, so I'm going to bring my equation into my y equals. So I'm going to do y equals, then I'm going to do variables, 5 for statistics, EQ for equation, and then regression equation, and enter. So there's my y equals, there's variables, 5 for statistics, equation, enter, and then I'm going to graph. And notice that it's going through almost every single data point. Really nice model. Alright. And then the last step, we graphed it again, which is our step 8. The last step would be to make a prediction. But at this point, we're not going to make a prediction. We're just going to worry about learning the process. So I hope at this point that the process seems to be a little bit clearer. All right, so that's the end of your video. Let me give you your problems. And I will be expecting you to be able to do the regression analysis on a quiz. I will probably allow you a 3x5, so I'm just going to put a little note over here on the side. You're going to be able to have a 3x5 note card for the quiz. And that quiz is going to be 4.9 to 4.10. We're not quite done yet, but when we get done, that will be our quiz. And you may include on that note card the steps for regression. And at that point, maybe if you put them in your own terms, it will help you to remember that process. So that's just a little side note. All right, so your problems for the day are going to be to, number 1, write the quadratic function. Equation, I want it in standard form. Remember, it's important to pay attention to that. For the graph, oops, sorry, that has these characteristics. All right, so your first one is your x-intercepts are going to be a -3 and 2, and it's going to pass through the point 3, 12. So that's your first problem. The second problem, you're going to be given the vertex, and that vertex is going to be a -7, -3, and it's going to pass through the point -1, 12. All right, so remember, I want you to write the equation for those. I want the equation in standard form. The next problem that I'm going to have you do is I want you to find the quadratic model. And remember, when you're asked to find a model, that means find the equation for the following data set. Okay, and then I want you to predict the y value when x is equal to 8. So our data is not necessarily going to represent anything in particular. I'm just going to give you a set of data and then have you do the regression on that data. So there's going to be my x's and my y's. My first one is a -3 and then 17.425. My second x is 15.472. Then I have a -1, and it's going to be 12.997. You want to be very careful with your data entry. Then I have a 1 at 6.481. And then I have a 2 at 2.440. And then I have a 3 and a -2.123. So that is your data. So what I'd like you to do is do the regression analysis for a quadratic. Okay, make sure that you record the model, which means record your equation. And then I want you to predict when x is 8. All right? So I want you to predict when x is 8. Alrighty, so there are your 3 problems for the day, 2 on the first one, and then your regression analysis. If you don't have a calculator at home, you're going to have to come borrow one of mine before school and make sure that you can try this process. Make sure that you bring your notes with you so you have all of the steps written down. Alrighty, there is your notes on regression analysis. Good luck with the process.